Hey guys, so I'm back. Let's pick up from where we left off from the last one, right? So we were talking about basically how to um, how to run an application by using npm start, and then basically you'll get this right here, right? So now let's talk about what are some of the moving parts that you're seeing from this file, from this folder right here, from the root, and how is all this really getting put together. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff that is happening under the hood that we're not really going to go in too deep with it, because I am a front-end developer. A lot of my tutorials are geared towards front-end development, and I don't really get too involved in explaining back-end stuff and all that. Like, I know it conceptually, I know how it works conceptually, I know how things eventually get other things moving, but it's out of my scope, so I don't really have to deal with them so much. And there's so much information I can process in this old brain, so I just. Oh, by the way, if you notice, I took this off. So I noticed that I had it in the first video, and I didn't realize that I had them on until I was already halfway through it. And I'm like, oh, it kind of feels weird to take it off now, but I'm not gonna take it off. I'm just gonna pretend that I need them, and then I basically just took them off. But the reason why I had them on is because I get so used to it, having these on my head. Because if you see that back there, yeah, I'm a struggling musician, so I use that a lot. So anyway, let's get to this. All right. So what do we got here? So, like, well, first you'll see essentially you have three main folders here with some of these files. We already talked about some of these files and what they are. And there's the README file here that has basically some of the stuff that I can already talk to you about. Like, for example, having a, like, where create React app will be. That will be a good one. So go to that address right there, this GitHub address, and get a little bit more involved with React and where did it come from. If you notice right there, it says Facebook. Guess what? React was invented by Facebook. So yeah, it'll be cool to know little bits and pieces of things like that, just for random information, not related to this project. npm start, which we already talked about it. This is how you actually run the application on your browser in development mode. And then npm test is basically how you run a few user test sessions so that you can test how your data is moving and reacting to the front end and to the DOM before you actually send it to production. But we're not really going to touch that into this effort. Then we have npm run build, which we didn't talk about it too much, and we're still not going to. But what it does is basically it builds your application into a package, compiled package, and minimized ball of everything that you have coded in an inside application, and it makes it into one compact ball basically. And that's what gets sent to the browser. That's what to the server, and that's what the server is going to basically publish in your domain, and that will be how your site gets published out there. Because you can send, for example, React to the domain itself, to the browser. You can send I don't know, a lot of this stuff, a lot of these languages, the browser doesn't really understand it. So they need to be compiled, they need to be transformed into a language that can be interpreted by the browser. And that's basically what this does. Is basically run build gets Webpack in action so that it gets all of this stuff compiled into a language that can be interpreted by the browser, and then that's how the browser will show it. All right. And we actually might touch this at the end, when we actually do a build of everything that will be ready to send to like Netlify or something like that. But let's not touch too much about that. And if you want to read about what eject does, you can read a little bit more about it. So anyway, so that's what the README is basically. It's just it doesn't do anything. You can delete it and it won't hurt a thing. It's just information. And we already know what the package JSON does, all this stuff. So, and we know the DOM modules. We're not going to touch that either. So now we have these two folders here that we have to talk about. So the public folder, what is the public folder? So the public folder is basically what the code that you're putting into your source folder right here, right? What all that code is going to be, or where it's going to be sent to for display in the DOM, right? Where it's going to, it's kind of like a bezel, okay? So you have a Favicon Icon, ICO, which is nothing but this little icon up here. As you can see it, is that little icon up here. So if you change this for, if you want, you're gonna have your website and you obviously will have a logo maybe. You can change this, make your own logo somewhere, and have it transformed to ICO, which there are many websites out there that can do this, and then replace it for this one, and that's how you'll end up with something else differently here. And then you have the actual logo, which you can see here, there it is, and in different sizes, because some like iPads or iPhones and Androids, they use different sizes. So it's into different sizes. Do you really need this stuff? Not really. It doesn't break the application if you take it out. You just won't have a logo. So they're kind of like one of those things where it's nice to have. You should always have a logo on a favicon, but it's not really necessary. Manifest is basically also how you then tell the browsers or the viewport that these logos are being sent to, you know, how they should be used depending on the image and the sizes and the viewport and all this stuff. So let's not get too hung up on this stuff. Now this index HTML, that's the ticket. So this is the actual HTML file where your application will render into, okay? So you have a lot of stuff here in the head here, which is basically has a lot of stuff that to make it a little bit more complicated than it has to be, but these are just comments. So you can just delete this comment right here, for example. Delete this comment right here. You don't need that. Delete all of these comments actually. Alright, and now you can see how it's a lot shorter, right? So without getting too far into this, these are all basically meta information for the browser that is coming, including these right here as well. These right here, well, actually even this, everything everything inside that head right there is going to be meta information for the browser regarding, you know, the viewport and description of the page you're looking at, things like that. A lot of it has to do for SEO purposes, so which is search engine optimization, which we're definitely not going to cover in this video. So let's just ignore this head right here because you don't really need it. If you're doing an application for a company, more than likely that company is going to have a marketing department with a search engine optimization manager or some type of SEO engineer or something like that that is going to be dealing with that stuff, not you. This is not part of a development effort, okay? Unless you are a freelancer, then you kind of have to take that hat and put on the other and do everything. Yeah, been there. All right, and then we have this body right here. So in the body is where you're going to actually run your application in, and you have this little tag here. It's called no script, and so you need to enable JavaScript to run this app. Because React is built on JavaScript, you need to have a browser that runs JavaScript, and you know, for React to work on. React is nothing but synthetic sugar on top of JavaScript. It's JavaScript. It just has a syntax that makes it a little bit friendlier or a little bit easier to use and a little bit more componential. Like it has more components together that make things work easier without having to construct everything from scratch. But it's basically JavaScript. So that's why it tells you that JavaScript needs to be available in the browser. Now you will think, well, why wouldn't you? Well, there are very, 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 very secure applications out there that disable JavaScript because they're afraid that hackers will use it to somehow hijack the site and find ways in, things like that. So definitely it needs to have JavaScript, otherwise it won't run. And then you have this right here. So that div right there, whether it's a div or I don't know, span tag, that doesn't really matter. But it's a div because it's more of like, let me make sure that I forgot that I did take stuff out. Okay, never mind that. Alright, cool. So anyway, it's a div because it's basically what everybody, I don't know, the div is, how can I explain this without taking too much time? The div is basically a container, an HTML tag for a container where you will have stuff to it, and is used most commonly for basically arbitrary stuff. So like if you don't want to use if you want to use a paragraph, you will use a P tag, which is for paragraphs, because you actually mean it's more meaningful type of tag for what you're doing. If you're going to use a table, then you use the actual table tag when you want something tabular. If you want to use an address, you will use the address tag. For a sidebar, aside, for a body like that. But whenever you have something that is kind of arbitrary, it's just kind of like, it's just a container you're gonna put stuff in, right? Then you use div as your division block. All right, and then you're gonna give it an ID. Now, why does it have an ID? Why is it called root? Okay, well, the name itself doesn't really matter. That's just the name they gave it. It could be root, or it could be start here. It could be whatever you want it to be, as long as it matches somewhere else, and I'll show you that later. But this is just basically a reference that I am putting in here. I am basically marking this with an X, right? And then I'm telling another file later, I'll show you, hey, I need you to find the mark that I made, because X marks a spot, okay? Which that X will be ID root. In other words, hey, go look for a div by ID of root, and that's where you're going to do your thing. Now, why is that important to remember? That's important to remember because do not use this ID of name root anywhere else, because it could create bugs. If you have an ID of name root, say in some kind of file inside your application, and this ID root is going to run on every single page. This is going to run at the very top of your scope of your site. If you run your application, all of a sudden you have an ID root, and then you have an ID root also within it, inside there for something, and you're telling, let's say for example, you're telling your code to make that element of ID root in here of background red, then what's going to happen is that it's going to get conflicted, because first it's going to find two IDs of the same root, so that might, it's in itself already crash. But even if it didn't crash, it's going to do it to this one and it's going to do this one, because it's telling it to do it to the ID of root. So if it's going to make this red, guess what? The entire application may be red and it's going to run into issues. So the only thing that I want you to take from this is don't use this ID of root anywhere else. You need a new name for a new ID anywhere else. Make sure it's anything else, just not root. If it helps, name it something that you know you will never use. Just make sure that you obviously use that in the other place that I'm going to show you, okay? But let's just leave it root for now. I'm going to go ahead and save that because I did clean up the file, so I will save it. And you notice everything that I took didn't break anything. All right, so that's basically all there is to know in the public folder. Now let's open the source folder, which is where we're actually going to be working. But before we move into anything else, we're going to go into this index.js here, because that index.js is actually the file, the JavaScript file that will send information to that public folder. So if you see now here, if you open in the index.js, you will see now a little bit of an unrecognizable code here for people who are not comfortable with React, you know, like this is like, what's this, right? So you have a bunch of imports over here, some weird React dump stuff here, and then another comment. Okay, so what does this mean? This import React from React is basically an instruction that you're giving your index.js to import React, the actual React library. Okay, I call it framework, some people call it library, to import the name React from the React library at the very index.js. That means that at the very top, I want the top to have the absolute, because index, everything is going to be underneath of index. So if everything that I import up here is going to have global scope over everything on the bottom of it. It's going to be the umbrella, okay? I also want React DOM. So what does React DOM do? It basically makes sure that React can work in the DOM, and not just in your code, but it also works in the DOM, and it compiles everything to be read by the DOM. And the DOM is basically a browser. Let's just call it browser. Okay. Here I'm importing the index CSS, which is this file over here. And this index CSS basically has CSS code that is going to apply to your entire website. So careful what you add here, because some CSS that you might add there may be related to only, for example, one page. Could be like maybe just an accordion for a page. So why would you want to put a CSS file, a CSS chunk of CSS in here that is going to apply to the entire website if it's only really going to be used in one element of an accordion, maybe 2 or 3 pages, and that's it, right? So don't add everything in the world to this particular folder right here. You may want to have a specific CSS file that you want to run for that particular page, and we'll do that later. But just for reference, you need to know that this index CSS will be the index CSS that will run throughout globally, and you want it to apply to the entire website. So like, for example, the header, that's something that is going to be, applied globally. The header is going to be the header in every page you go to. So the CSS for the header should go here because it is a global element. The footer, the body, say a card, yeah, most likely you're going to use cards everywhere. Table, the table style, the tables, you're going to use tables all the time, and lists, things like that. So those kind of stuff you want to put there. All right, so that is, where was I? All right, we were here, and then I'm importing app. So this is the part where we're actually starting to import our first component. So our first component is app, which is not isolated in a folder or anything. It's kind of still in the root, and that's fine. It can stay there. And this app right here is your first component that comes already built for you from React, and this is what is basically running this that you see here, and it's going to be injected. Let me just leave this open. It's going to be injected here, right, so that it is available to me at a global level. And then now is when I start working with the DOM. So this right here is basically usable because I added that there. If I comment this out, I'm going to have an error there that React DOM is not specified. So I need to make sure that this is always available to me or from this import. So I'm basically telling by this instruction here, I'm telling the React DOM to render. This is a render method that is available for me inside of this library to render this code right here, and that code right there is basically going to be a React application, and inside the React application I want you to run this component called app, which I am importing here, which is this guy here. Make sense? No? I'm not going to repeat it. Just back up a little bit and replay. Now, okay, so you told it all that. Okay, I see what you're saying. You told me to render this here, but where? Bam. Here is the infamous root that you need to match to this. So if this is going to be, like I said earlier, something unrecognizable like that, that's totally fine, man. That's totally cool. Just make sure that you copy that and add it there. Then it'll work. Let's try it. Let's save this and you'll see a break. And let's save that one and give it time. I had to refresh, sorry. And there it is, still works. You see that? It works fine. So now, I'm not saying you should do this. I do. I mean, I don't do nothing this weird, but I'm not saying you should, but I think it's actually a safe thing to do. I think it's cool to be able to do this because root is kind of like a name that I have found in other opportunities, in other times. I have found myself wanting to use it, and I was like, yeah, I wish I could use root here, and I didn't. So yeah, I think you should. Why not? Just maybe not this crazy, but you know what, let's leave the crazy in there for now. What I want you to understand from all this code right here is that what you're looking at here is a function. Okay, this render right here is a method, which is a function, and what you're looking at here is actually two arguments inside it. It doesn't seem like it because it's all broken down, but if I were to do this, you will see it a lot better. if I were to actually put it in this format, you will see it a lot better. There's this argument 1 and this is argument 2. Alright, so if you look at the render and you look at the you know what the instructions for the render does, and it basically tell you there how it needs to be put together and what it will have involved in it. And this right here is basically, it accepts 2 types of arguments. So one is, what do you want me to render, you know, and through where you want me to render it through. What do you want me to, where do you want me to render through? Okay, so that's basically what it is. And you don't need to worry about this stuff right here, but I will clean this up because I don't need those comments. So I'm just gonna go ahead and save that. Everything is running just the way it should. Okay, cool. Now so now that you understand all this, now let's just back up. Let's just go one step deeper into the whole. And the next step from here will be to go inside the app component, which is this app component. So what do we have here in the app component? It's basically just your main page, your very first page that is going to run everything in it. Okay, so this is where, for example, I will have my header, and then I will have my body, and then I will have and when I mean body, I don't mean body in HTML body. I would mean like div. I'm sorry, that was my bad. I should not have done that. That was very confusing. Just don't use that one. I would use this one. Oops, I almost made another mistake. There we go, class name. In React, you don't use class, you use class name, because class means something else. Alright, so class name body, and then here, then I will have a footer. So the best way that I can describe this is the app.js is technically your layout page. It's not really a page component, it's more like a layout that will lay out for you how your pages are going to be built on. It's going to be a main div that's going to consolidate everything in it, and then it's going to have a header, it's going to have a div where your body stuff is going to go, and then it's going to have a footer, things like that. You can build this up in any way you want, but this is just examples of what it would be like. So for right now, since we're not going to be using any of this stuff right here, I'm basically just going to delete this because I don't need that header stuff. And notice how I have a squiggly line now. That means that the logo is imported, it exists in my files, in my file structure, but it's not being used. It's declared, but it's never been read. So therefore, that means I don't need to import anything that I'm not using. So for the sake of cleanliness, I'm gonna do that. The app CSS, I could leave it there. It doesn't hurt to leave it there. But if you look at it, it's basically instructions about the logo and the header and the links and stuff that I already deleted. So none of this stuff right here is being used. Now remember when I said that if you have anything that is going to be used in only one place, that you should only add it to that page and not into the index CSS where it's global. Like for example, an accordion that is going to be used in only 1 or 2 or 3 pages or something like that. Well, that's what that means. That means making a CSS file, right, usually named after the page, right, after the page that you're working on, and then adding your CSS in there and making sure that you are importing it, and that's it. And it will act as if it was global, but it wasn't. It wasn't in your index CSS. It wasn't included inside this big one. It was still separate in a separate file, and it would only be read if it's imported. Okay, to prove that, I'm gonna save this, and this is gonna go away here now because I deleted what's in it. I'm gonna refresh it. There it is. There's nothing in there, but I'm gonna add something. So I'm gonna put h1. Okay, so if you want IntelliSense to work, go down to JavaScript and make sure that you pick JavaScript React, this one right here. Okay, now you can do h1 and that will work. So h1, and I'm gonna put hello from app. So I hit enter, and here it is, hello from app. Now notice I am using this app CSS, this folder right here. Let's see if I am really there is this class that I'm using, right? Which is this class right here. Let's see if I'm really using it. Let's make sure that we make that background color red. There it is. Okay, now you notice how it only did it to that app, which is this div right here. So it only did it to that right there. So if I take that out, if I comment it or delete it, that will go away. See? Now, because I am applying that CSS right here only inside of this CSS file, which is only imported here, that's why it's not affecting anything else. It's only affecting this code right here. Let's look at the difference. Just like I did this here, let's add it now to the global one, the big CSS, the big guy. Let's add it to the body, for example. Now you'll notice that everything became red. Why? Because it's added global. This is why you have to be careful. What you add here will always be globally, it will take global effect. Global effect. Alright, so I'll take that out. And I will take this out because I am not really going to use anything in there. I'll take that out as well. Yeah, what the heck. Alright. So there we go. We got hello from app that is being now sent to there. Now this class name right here, app, that's just a class, a CSS class, which I am not using anymore because I deleted that folder. So I don't have to use it anymore. I could just, I'm gonna name it container because I am going to eventually make use of a class named container. So I'm just gonna change that name to have it done ahead of time, but that's basically all you need. Alright, so moving along, all we have left to talk about is basically these folders here, like the logo is no longer being used. Obviously you don't see it anywhere. So should I just remove it? Yes, I don't think I need it. Oops, no, I didn't mean to say rename. I meant to say delete. So delete that and delete the test because we're not gonna do any testing. Leave that there. That's fine. Yeah, that's okay. Alright, so that's it. This is how we basically run it. If you want to run some tests so you see what all of this stuff does, how you can render things over here is, for example, you can do things like let's say you name a variable title and then you name it hello from variable. Oh, there you go. Hello from variable. Then you can come over here and in curly brackets put title, and then you can see now it says hello from variable. So you see it actually works where you can actually do binding and read not just something that you hard code in there, but you can read variables as well. It also can do 1 plus 2 and it would say 3. You know, it actually does computations or whatever. So it's smart JavaScript because you are using JavaScript and HTML together, which is what's called JSX, which I forgot what it stands for. Don't kill me. Look it up. Just Google. Look it up. All right, and you can also do a lot of other stuff. You could do, for example, let's say, for example, const. Let's say const. The title is true. There you go. So I'm gonna make it a no, I shouldn't. That's already declined up there. Constant title is title. There you go. Is title. So let's call it is title. Constant title equals true, right? So what I'm going to do here is I am going to say I am going to put a ternary. Show me the title, and then put the ternary. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. And then the ternary messages in here, and I'll explain what this means in a second. I have a title. I'm speechless. Okay, so what does this mean? Basically, it's saying if this sorry, is title. Yeah. If is title is true, show I have a title. Well, let's just actually, I'll show you this. Well, let's actually just bring this title in here. Yeah, let's do it this way. If is title is true, if this is true, do this or do this. It's a ternary function. This title right here. And if not, then show me this string that says I'm speechless. So when I save that, it says hello from variable because it's here, because this is true, and it's basically saying this is running this part right here. Now let's say it's false, then it says I'm speechless because it didn't find this to be true, so it goes to the negation part of the ternary function, which is this part here. So now this part here becomes true through, it's a more truthy response to this ternary, and that's why it says speechless. So you can see how you can use this in different ways to create logical operators, create mathematical functions or mathematical conditions and things like that, or just simply bind a property or something like that to it, or string. So there's many ways that this can be used in different ways. So that's the beauty of it. All right. And on that thought, I think I've already covered a lot and in very detail or in depth. So we are good to go with this one. And then in the next one, we're going to actually start talking about how to make a brand new component with props and start feeding these props through the main component, the parent component. Okay? See you in the next one.